Good morning. I'm Linda Feldman, Washington Bureau Chief of the Christian Science Monitor. Our guest today is Miguel Cardona, Education Secretary of the United States. This is his second appearance at a Monitor breakfast, so welcome back.
Thank you.
Secretary Cardona is a lifelong resident of Meriden, Connecticut, where he was a fourth grade teacher, a principal, and then assistant superintendent of schools. And in 2019, Governor Lamont appointed Dr. Cardona Commissioner of Education for the state of Connecticut. And then after President Biden took office, he was soon confirmed as the nation's 12th Secretary of Education. As the father of two school-aged children, he's also seeing the pandemic's impacts and post-pandemic impacts on education in his daily life, I imagine. So let's see, last year you had one in high school and one in college.
That's right.
So what's the score now?
So she's a senior.
She's
my daughter's a senior.
In high school?
In high school.
Okay.
And my son's a sophomore in college.
And where does he go to school?
He goes to the University of Hartford.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Let's keep that off the record if possible.
Yes, no, we don't. Okay. Anyway, thank you again for doing this. Now for the ground rules. We're on the record. Please, no live blogging or tweeting. In short, no filing of any kind while the breakfast is underway. And once the session ends at 10, there's no embargo. We will email a rough transcript from this breakfast to all reporters here shortly after we conclude. And as many of you know, if you'd like to ask a question, just wave at me and sure we'll have, plenty of time for many questions. So, Secretary Cardona, if you'd like to make some opening remarks, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Linda, and all of you here. Really, I enjoyed the last time I came here. It was great. I got to go a little bit deeper, and I appreciate that opportunity. Usually I'm, at a podium, there's a bunch of microphones in front of me, and then I have like 30 seconds, and then there's a bunch of questions, and then I run off to the next stop. So I'm really pleased to be here today. I want to share that I'm feeling more optimistic than usual. I'm usually very optimistic, but we just wrapped a bus tour where it's always wonderful, especially as a lifelong educator, to actually see policies, to put faces to it, whether that's early childhood programming in Illinois or after-school programming in Minnesota. It's good to see students engaged. The bus tour was an amazing opportunity to really remind folks what public education does. We're really proud of the work that we're doing. We have a lot of work to do. And as much as I'm optimistic, I also have a great sense of urgency, an urgency that hasn't been diminished after the pandemic. And we're taking advantage in this administration of this moment we have to really raise the bar. And I came with gifts this morning, so please leave with one of these, and we'll get you all set. Thank you. Please leave with one of these, and if we don't have enough, I'll make sure I get you one. Because to me, we need to have a plan to improve public education. We need to raise the bar in our country, and I believe our plan does that. Not only with the American Rescue Plan dollars that have provided unprecedented dollars to schools to assist with recovery and reimagining schools, we've worked really hard around the teacher pipeline. And we're focusing on making sure that we have highly qualified teachers in every classroom, that we're creating grow your own programs that increase the diversity in our schools. We are adamant about ensuring that we don't go back to what it was in 2019. That wasn't good enough. As a father and as a lifelong educator, I can tell you we have to do better. And we have pathways that we're really focusing on to make sure that these, what I call tsunami of jobs that are coming, and these careers that are coming, because we're going to make things in America, because this administration is investing in America. We have a responsibility in education to do better, to make sure we're connecting students to not only the workforce needs, but the 2-year and 4-year programs that are going to be needed in order for us to continue to compete internationally. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about disrupting a broken higher education system. The president has been pretty bold about not protecting the status quo in higher education. So we're fixing a broken system, and we're improving inclusivity, we're improving access and affordability in higher education. Student loan debt gets a lot of attention, But we're also increasing accountability in higher education, making sure that we address some of the runaway costs in higher education and open doors to higher education for many more people. I'm excited about the work we have. I recognize that it's in a context of a political season where education gets thrown out on the table and people have these outlandish thoughts. But at the end of the day, look, I'm not a DC insider. I spent about a week of my life in Washington, D.C. before I became Secretary of Education. And for me, I know what's happening in the classrooms. I know what's happening at the local level. And we have a plan to fix education in the country. Let me just pause there and just say thank you for being here, and I look forward to a robust conversation.
All right. Well, thank you very much. So I'll kick it off with a question, and then we'll move to reporters around the table. And again, if anybody wants to throw out a question, just wave at me and I'll put you on the list. And I'm sure there'll be many questions about your Raising the Bar initiative, but I really want to ask you about affirmative action in the wake of the Supreme Court ruling that sharply limited affirmative action in college admissions. You've been critical of legacy admissions at elite colleges and universities. And I know your department has launched a civil rights investigation into legacy admissions. So can you just tell us where that stands and what other means do you have to change or eliminate that practice beyond your bully pulpit?
Right. So, the affirmative action decision by the Supreme Court, I believe they got it wrong. Mm-hmm. Even with affirmative action, our college campuses don't reflect the beautiful diversity of our country. This is taking us backwards. We saw in California when they eliminated the affirmative action strategy there, their enrollment by black and brown students dropped, and it hasn't recovered to the point. It's gotten better, but not great. So what we're doing is looking at admissions practices at large. And yes, there is an open case, which I cannot discuss specifically on that case, around legacy admission. But, I think we have to ask ourselves questions about what we're doing in higher education. If we can value someone's last name or whether or not they can write a check, but not deliberate attempts to diversify the student body, which we all know, even the Supreme Court recognizes that a diverse learning environment is a richer learning environment. So we are going to use our bully pulpit, but more than just to talk about what we believe. More importantly, we're bringing together college presidents from across the country to identify ways, strategies that follow the law, but do increase diversity, which means maybe one example of that is earlier recruitment, getting into our high schools earlier. Making sure we have dual language programs in every high school so students see themselves as college material, especially those students who have historically been underserved in our K-12 and higher ed institutions.
Okay. All right. Jackie Valley, to your right from the Monitor.
Well, first of all, thank you, Secretary, for being here. I appreciate it. You mentioned the American Rescue Plan in your opening remarks. I'd like to start there. I think there's some nervousness in K-12 schools about the approaching deadline. Are there any ongoing discussions about new infusions of federal funding? And if so, what might that look like?
Yeah. I started as a fourth grade teacher. I always say last century. It was a long time ago. And it's almost like a known that in education you're going to do more with less every year. The American Rescue Plan dollars represent not only an infusion of dollars for recovery, but it sends the message that education matters in this country. And I worked with superintendents over the last 2.5 years as secretary who are concerned about when the money runs out, right? When it sunsets. We have established technical assistance around sustainability of efforts that were initiated through the American Rescue Plan dollars. But we recognize that, a couple things. The federal government pays about 9% of education budgets total. So we need to see an increase in the other 91% to maintain some of the strategies that we know work. I always tell governors, I tell state leaders, I tell local leaders, with education, just match the urgency of the president. Don't do more. Just match the urgency of the president. And not only in the American Rescue Plan dollars, but looking at our annual budget proposals that aim to increase Title I dollars, that aim to increase IDEA dollars, and funding for Grow Your Own programs. The things that we value most, or the things that schools are struggling with the most, we see them in our annual budgets also. We're fighting now a Republican plan to cut Title I by like 80%. So we're going to continue with our annual budget proposals to kind of lift up those strategies that worked during the American Rescue Plan. We're working more closely with state legislative leaders, with state boards of education, with governors about increasing the importance of those strategies that worked under ARP. And I'll be very frank with you. The governors have been great. State legislative leaders have been great about recognizing the value of education. There's the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which you could say the $2 billion there for mental health support. The question is, what's going to happen when that money dries up? We are working with HHS to improve Medicaid reimbursement for students that require mental health supports, so that's an ongoing, sustainable source of funds. We're simplifying the process. That was met with a lot of with welcome from superintendents. We recognize there's going to be a need for state and local leaders also to, invest more in education than they have in the past, or else we're going to be dealing with educator shortages and other, our students are not reading at the level that they need to be. That's going to require everyone to put more into education.
Do you want to follow up, or? I'm just curious about that. You say you want, 9% federal funding, 91% local. I mean, you want them to spend more, but how do they come up with that money?
Mm-hmm. Well, look, I think we have to recognize that pay now, pay later.
Right.
You either invest in education or you deal with the symptoms of underinvestment. Mm-hmm. We've been dealing as a country, we've normalized the symptoms of underinvestment. The United States ranks 9th in developed countries in literacy. It ranks in the 30s in math. You think it's expensive now?
Yeah.
When we can't compete with China in the future because we're not investing in our education, that's going to be more expensive.
Right.
So to me, we have to recognize this is an investment. Look at the cost our states are facing now with the shortage of educators. And not to mention the long impact that's going to have on our students when they're being taught by substitute teachers or underqualified teachers. Mm-hmm. When we know 70% of the jobs in 2027 will require a higher education, some higher education, and we're not producing in our K-12 schools the number of students that we need to take those higher education positions, but also the workforce positions. So to me, it's really communicating the message that we are in this together, and that it is a shared investment in our future.
Okay. Tal Copan from the Boston Globe.
Sticking on K-12 education, you were fairly outspoken, and so was the president, against this concept of book bans, some of these shorthanded as culture war concepts that are being weighed at the local level. At the same time, the history of federal involvement in K-12 education is incredibly fraught. So I'm curious, as outspoken as you and the president are on these ideas, what can the Department of Education actually legally and conceptually do to support schools the way you would like to?
Sure.
And then I have a follow-up.
Sure, okay. Look, I approach this as a teacher. I approach this issue from the perspective of a school principal. That I did that role for 10 years. And I approach it as a father of two students, two Latino children, at a time where you're more likely to find the protagonist of a book being a puppy than a Latino in this country. What message is that sent to my kids? So when we have attacks that are very targeted toward black curriculum, or when we have targeted attacks against LGBTQ students, I stand up. As a father, I stand up, and as an educator, I stand up. You're right. The federal role in curriculum is non-existent, right? It's not there, and that's okay. And you know what? As a former chief, a former district leader, I respect that. That's how it should be. But I will not stay silent as an educator and as a father when I see that we're taking Amanda Gorman off the bookshelves, Toni Morrison off the bookshelves, a book on Roberto Clemente off the bookshelf. That to me is very concerning, and it should be concerning to everyone, because what's next? Now, you ask, so what is your role? So lifting up, number one, how backwards that is, but also it gives me an opportunity to lift up Rudine Sims Bishop's work, her research on books and curriculum being windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. Windows into other cultures, mirrors where you could see yourself in the literature, and sliding glass doors where you could visit another culture through literature. And we also have the Office for Civil Rights that will investigate when students or communities feel that students are being taught in a hostile learning environment where their civil rights are being violated and the sense of belonging is being questioned. So we do have those. I think I also have the opportunity to lift up good practices. I have the opportunity to lift up states that are doing it right, states that are inclusive and make all students feel welcome.
And in your opening, you made a reference to the political conversation about education, including outlandish thoughts. I'm curious if you could identify any of those that you find particularly outlandish.
Jeez. Look, I'll just start with some of the book banning. Some of the culture wars that, there's some that are trying to force religion into public schools, and as a Christian, I have a problem with that. We have the overstepping of state government telling, well-trained education leaders with their doctorates and what they do, what they have to do in the classroom. And there's in my opinion, a false belief that, just because in the governor's office you say something, when that classroom door closes, that's going to be followed. You're creating a sense of distrust, and you're creating division in our schools. I could go on. There are 12 states that we're paying attention to that passed some really outlandish laws that really target LGBTQ communities in ways that 10 years ago would have been unbelievable in red or blue states. The rhetoric goes up, the more people want a national profile, to be very frank with you. Because if you remember, 2.5 years ago, we were fighting the fight in some of these same states who were ordering that their districts could not require masks, even though the medical professionals were recommending it because of the transmission rates. So there's an overstep of state lawmakers in some states. And again, twofold. Number one, to raise their national profile, so we're talking about them. And number two, because they want to see division in public schools, so they could sell the alternative, which is a private school with tuition paid for by taxpayers. You got me started.
Can I follow up on that?
Sure, of course.
I wonder if you have a response to a lot of the Republican 2024 candidates' proposal to do away with your entire department.
Sure.
And in your response here, I wonder if you, like those OCR, Office of Civil Rights investigations, have you opened any that specifically address book bans?
There are some, let me just go to the second one. There are some that were brought forward regarding hostile learning environments, which include book bans. So yes, it's surfacing. So the candidates who are talking about closing the Department of Education,
And it's local.
many,
Yeah.
they don't even know what we do. They don't. I almost find it comical that one of the candidates, and I won't mention the name so that I don't give that person an opportunity to have their name written in an article about this meeting today, but talking about closing it, and then later in the one of the debates, this person was talking about the importance of getting our literacy and numeracy scores up. This person was talking about the importance of creating pathways to careers. And this person was talking about the importance of making sure mental health needs of our students are being met. What I wanted to do was send that person a raise the bar strategy because they're promoting what we're doing. And it's not just lip service. I always tell my team, let's go beyond the top line. Let's talk about the $30 million that we're doing through the Augusta Hawkins grant that creates Grow Your Own programs. Let's talk about the focus that we have on literacy and numeracy and academic recovery, what we're doing there. And then the pathway work. Red and blue states, I've talked to governors who understand now that if we get this right, this is economic development. I was in Columbus, Ohio recently, and I talked to, I think it was the vice president of Intel. And he told me, we dropped roughly $2 billion to settle in Columbus, Ohio. Why? Because their community college understands the pathway to get me the staff that I need. And they're willing to provide professional learning opportunities for my staff. So I have a built-in professional development arm in Intel because I set up shop in Columbus, Ohio. That tax, what they're going to be getting there, the financial benefit that they're going to be getting, not to mention the pathway for the students there, is unbelievable. So, at the state and local level, they're getting it. I just want our federal folks who are spewing a lot of that to come read Raise the Bar. Let's sit down and you'll realize that what we need to do is make sure that this department is fully funded to get the job done. There's a lot at stake if we don't.
Let's see, Annette Meyritz from Handelsblatt of Germany.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you for taking my question. I would like to ask you a bit about the broader implications of rising poverty in this country on education. This report on poverty yesterday, my readers in Europe and Germany, they read it as no article in the last 3 months. So this has international focus as well. So I would like to know the concerning numbers, especially amongst children. In what way are schools, colleges are going to deal with rising poverty, and what are you preparing for? And I have a follow-up.
Sure, that's a great question. Look, our public schools serve a total between pre-K-12 and higher education, 65 million students. And this pandemic exacerbated gaps in poverty, lack of access, and we have the responsibility and the privilege of serving these families and helping them not only get back academically, but get back on their feet in all ways. So what are we doing? In the last 2 years, the president doubled full-service community school dollars from $75 million to $150 million. I visited a full-service community school last week, and I think it was in Kansas, and I saw programming for parents to help them be more employable, skill them up, mental health needs of students being addressed in schools, dental needs. It's hard to learn if your teeth hurt. I've seen, I think we have 17 states through our support and nudging are providing free breakfast and lunch for students. So we're taking care of basic needs. We recognize that it's our responsibility, if we want a student to read, that we have to take care of the conditions for learning, which is why we're focusing so much on mental health. This is why we're focusing so much on even childcare, so that parents could go back to work or go back to school. In the higher education space, we're forgiving loans for those who are struggling to get back on their feet. The Supreme Court, in my opinion, made the wrong decision to stop the student debt relief plan that would have prevented millions of people from going into default a year. So, but we're going to continue to provide affordability in higher education. And another thing that it seems internationally it might not seem like a specific strategy that can answer the international, but it does, because we recognize public service is the way to help get out of poverty. And we're providing public service loan forgiveness to people that choose to serve their community, helping those in poverty. We're forgiving loans, college loans for those folks after 10 years of service. So we have a lot of efforts and strategies embedded in our policy that really try to level the playing field in education, because for too long in this country, we can almost predict success by race and place, and poverty is a big factor in that.
Just to follow up on that, when we look at the elections next year, and we hear candidates from the Republican side, cutting the education, your house, and cutting funds, exactly that's what you were talking about. Combined with those poverty numbers, where do the U.S. stand in 2 years in case this happens?
It's not going to happen, number one. Look, I would want to hear, so it sounds nice. We're going to cut. What would those candidates say to the 321,000 veterans that benefited from an increase in $900 in Pell Grants, which is another thing to help take care of poverty? Pell Grants are for students who are economically challenged or disadvantaged. It's additional dollars if they qualify to go back to school. 321,000 veterans benefited from that. I would love a follow-up question to one of those candidates to say, what would you tell those veterans who are now not going to be able to continue with education, served our country, and now the country's falling short on them? So, number one, it's not going to happen. The constituents that are benefiting from the work that we do are too great. I guess your question was, what would I tell them about this? Like, if you drill down a little bit and see what it means to the people that you're supposed to serve, you will recognize how you're hurting the people that you want to serve.
I just want to follow up on the student loan forgiveness issue. I mean, the Supreme Court made clear in Biden v. Nebraska that you can't have $400 billion government expenditure just by executive action. And now the department is pursuing the same goal via different avenues. So how does this new effort to forgive and reduce student debt, how does that pass muster in court?
Right.
Where the other one didn't.
So look, not only do I think the Supreme Court got it wrong, I don't even think they should have seen the case.
Well.
And they did.
They did.
So, to me, it's the same mentality where we're going to make sure that the policy that Congress gave me the authority to use is used to the extent that we believe is necessary. Now, we could go back to the status quo and not do anything and continue with a system of have and have-nots, which is what higher education has been in many parts of our country. Or we could fix a broken system and disrupt the status quo. We recognize the Supreme Court decision and the actual over 100 pages will determine the course of action that we take through our negotiated rulemaking. Okay. Right? We're not going to be blind to that. We recognize if they felt that way now, they're probably going to feel that way later. Right? So we have DOJ, White House, and our team's lawyers discussing this regularly. I'm in conversations regularly with the White House on this. We recognize that we have to take into account how they ruled. Right. But the Higher Education Act does give me authority. I know the HEROES Act did as well. So we're going to have to go through the negotiated rulemaking to work that process out. But I think the real message is that this administration's not done fighting. And to those that say, well, you don't feel like you're going to have that, you're doing this, but you don't feel confident about it. Look, we've provided $117 billion in debt relief in 2.5 years. That's more than any other administration. You combine them, they still wouldn't meet that. So from day one, the president has been very clear about directing me and my team to find ways to provide debt relief to those who need it. Public service loan forgiveness, borrower defense, those who are have total and permanent disabilities, those folks who have already qualified for it just haven't been processed. So we are taking steps to provide debt relief, and we're going to continue to do that so that higher education can be more accessible.
Okay. A reporter from the Christian Science Monitor.
Hi, Secretary.
How are you?
So in this country, higher education has been seen as a pathway to upward social and economic mobility. But we've seen college enrollment not recover from the pandemic, and we also see some reports the other day of Gen Z young people saying that they're just not interested in higher education. I'm wondering, what does that say about our country in the future, and what can be done?
It provides us an opportunity. Again, Gen Z is probably saying, look, I'm going to end up with $150,000 in debt, with interest ballooning, in a $40,000 a year job, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. That's the system that we have. So we're changing. We're disrupting that. We're going after colleges that are making the cost way too high. We introduced a SAVE plan, which makes access to higher education more affordable for so many more folks. I'm more excited about the SAVE plan than I am about the work that we've done with student debt relief, because that's a one-shot deal of student debt relief. The SAVE plan, there are generations of students who are in elementary school right now that will benefit from that. I had a conversation with a young man, 6th grader, who told me in 6th grade, one of the smartest kids I had in my school, that he's not going to college because he can't afford it. And they almost resigned themselves with his father there. I can't afford that. We have to change that mindset in this country. So, couple strategies. Number one, make higher education more affordable, more accessible. And we're doing that. But also make sure that earlier, high school, even middle school, we're creating pathways to some of these 2-year programs or certificate programs or credentialing programs where you don't need a 4-year degree and you could be very gainfully employed. Welders who code are making over 6 figures without a 4-year degree. And I can tell you, an electric boat in Connecticut has like 6,000 openings. We have to evolve our thinking to make sure that our students have pathways. And when you graduate with a credential from a high school or from a 2-year college where you don't have $100,000 in debt, it doesn't mean you're done. It means you can go into the workforce, make 75, make 80, continue, get an advanced degree. Oftentimes it's the company that's paying for your higher education now. And then make a really good salary on something that you love. So it's our responsibility to evolve earlier, create those pathways. That's a huge part of our plan. I think Gen Z understands that right now, this proposition of going to higher education with the hopes that there's jobs in those fields, we need to revisit that. And I will say, though, in the same breath, we want to encourage students to go on to higher education. A college graduate makes on average $1 million more than a high school graduate. So we have to make it more accessible, more affordable, and we have to show the return on investment in a 4-year degree. And I'm challenging higher ed 4-year institutions to get to the table too, to show that value to parents.
I mean, higher ed has just gotten ridiculously expensive. I mean, what can be done about the cost structure of higher education? Yeah.
So again, I can't. Our role is limited. Through the negotiated rulemaking process and through our regulatory process, we can put in some provisions. And I'm proud of what we're doing. Look, we've increased accountability in higher education. I was told early on that there's higher education changes don't happen. It's hard to touch higher education. I disagree with that. We reinstated our enforcement team. We've gone after borrower defense. We've gone after those CEOs of for-profit institutions that are making a killing off the backs of first-gen college students that are sold a dream and never delivered. We've increased the gainful employment rules. We're creating that watch list. Public and private institutions are going to be shown for the value that they have or the lack of value that they have, so that parents can make informed decisions. When you're paying $150,000 for a social work degree, and a local college close by has that same degree for $65,000, we want parents to know that. The college scorecard, a couple years ago, we improved the college scorecard to make it more accessible, so parents know what they're getting. And I've questioned, I think questioned is a light way of putting it, the U.S. News and World Reports on college rankings. I value institutions that are more inclusive and that work really hard for college completion, like Georgia State, more than those colleges that are so exclusive that half our country's students can't even look at those colleges because they won't be accepted, they won't be looked at.
Todd Gilman from the Dallas Morning News.
Thanks, Secretary.
How are you?
I apologize. I was often late for homeroom also when I was
We're working on chronic absenteism too. Don't worry about that.
I wanted to ask you, you mentioned some pushback about masking and and other measures that schools take. So we saw last week the uproar right here in Silver Spring, Maryland, where conservatives got hold of this letter. The principal said there were 3 kids and an adult in one kindergarten class who came down with COVID. The principal said everybody else in the class who hasn't come down with COVID is going to have to wear masks for 10 days. Senator Ted Cruz, who I cover, and some other conservatives said this is terrible, this is tyranny. How do you, what do you say to that attitude, and how do you overcome that in order to keep kids in school and teachers healthy and schools open in the next COVID season?
Look, I'm going to acknowledge that the reopening efforts were very challenging for this country. I was sitting as Commissioner of Education. I had to present Connecticut a plan. Connecticut's a fairly blue state. I had to present Connecticut with a reopening plan. And I brought together superintendents groups, parents groups, teacher groups, and we worked really hard to come up with a plan that we could live with. Not perfect, it'll be tweaked. And I was met with so much resistance from so many people. And then, thankfully it worked well. We reopened. I became Secretary of Education. Only 46% of our schools were open full-time across the country when I became Secretary. Within 9 months, we had over 95% of our schools fully reopened. I got asked a question, I think it was, I'm not sure what state it was, last week. I was very clear, our schools must stay open. Our kids cannot afford that. I'm unapologetic about that. With that said, I trust the judgment of our local leaders and our health experts. 6 years ago, I couldn't tell you what an epidemiologist did. But for the last 3 years, I had them on speed dial because they know transmission better than I do. And better than Ted Cruz does too. So my mentality on this is, look, I get it. I respect the fact that people feel very strongly about it. And shame on us if we exclude those parents' perspective. Shame on us. At the end of the day, what we need to do is make sure we're caring for the well-being of students and trusting our medical experts, our health departments, to work to make sure that we can stay open. I often remind folks of the Omicron. Remember the Omicron wave? Thankfully, people weren't passing at the same rate. But people had to stay home. People were leaving. Schools shut down because they didn't have teachers. Because the teachers couldn't be in because they had COVID. The impact on a community when a school closes is significant. So, let's remove the politics from it. Let's listen intently to different perspectives.
Well, let me ask you a slightly different way.
Sure.
Because as you say, Connecticut's a blue state. Maryland is definitely a blue state. And Maryland is a state that empowers school districts and principals to impose requirements like this. But there are other states like Texas that actually forbid a local mask mandate. And I've heard from the Texas State Teachers Association, whatever they're called, that is a little jealous that in Maryland, a principal could do this, and this couldn't even happen here. How do you keep kids safe in states that the political winds say you can't even force kids to mask when there's an outbreak in the class when there's an outbreak?
Remember her question when I was saying that the governors in some states were overexerting, and it's a symptom of disrespect toward the profession. Let me go there. It's a symptom of disrespect when we have someone sitting in an office where they're vaccinated, they can control who walks into their office, making decisions in a classroom where we have 25, 30 students, some of them who have ill parents at home or grandparents, and a teacher who may have children at home. We have them telling them how to function in their workspace, and it defies what the medical experts are saying. You're going to see, in places like that, and I'm hopeful that it doesn't get to the point where we start seeing some of the division we saw when we were reopening. But it's places like that where educators feel like they don't want to be there, or schools are less likely to have that cohesive, culture where students thrive It's a challenge, but it's a symptom of disrespect that we've seen across this country over the last 3 years. In some places that want to take the decision-making out of the experts who have degrees in this. This is not a hobby. Education is not a hobby. We have people with degrees in this that care about these children. And, I'm going to bring it back to what you said at the beginning. This is why in some places kids are chronically absent. When you have a parent who might be suffering from cancer and has a very weakened immune system, and you have a governor saying, I forbid you to have students wear masks, that child might not be in school because the mother doesn't want to get sick. So it's real. It's real. And I think some of this ideology needs to let the local decision makers make those decisions. That's where they should be made.
Laura Meckler from the Washington Post.
Hi, Laura.
Hi. Wondering if you could talk about the shift that's underway towards the science of reading and phonics, and do you welcome that, and what do you think the federal department should be doing, if anything, to...
Right. See, I taught reading in 4th grade, the whole language model, and then, the phonics, and when I was a school principal, thank you. When I was a school principal, I remember, those debates were raging, right? For me, reading instruction, there are elements to it. You got your phonics, phonemic awareness, comprehension, vocabulary, fluency. Those are the 5 components that have to be a part of every reading program. What happened in our country is 2 of those 5 components, usually phonics and phonemic awareness, went to the wayside. And we use contextual skills, and which are important comprehension skills to read the context to try to understand what a word means. To me, we need to make sure we're teaching phonemic awareness. We need to be teaching phonics. Those are the foundational skills to develop fluency, which would then help with comprehension. So I do believe we're moving in the right direction as a country, understanding the science of reading and ensuring that we're giving students a strong foundation. And as far as the federal government, again, while we do not promote curriculum or one particular curriculum over another, we have an Office for Elementary and Secondary Education with education experts in there, and we are promoting the importance of the foundations of reading skill development, which includes those 5 components.
But given that there is a lot of evidence now for the science of what's called the science of reading,
right,
and given that our literacy rates are atrocious, really, all over the country, I was surprised yesterday when you guys announced these new grants that you said that were going to be evidence-based, but I asked a follow-up question later whether that would meant they needed to be, that the money had to go towards sciences and reading or programs that included a phonics element, and the answer was no, it doesn't have to go that.
Right.
So why not use that as a lever that you have?
Right. The technical assistance that we provide really supports evidence-based strategies, which includes the science of reading and the fundamentals of reading, which I just explained. But again, we certainly want to support states and districts that are using evidence-based practices, and that's a requirement. But we fall short of requiring a specific curricular programming or...
But why?
Because the federal government's role in curriculum is pretty limited.
Are you not allowed to, or do you choose not to?
We are limited in promoting one type of curriculum over another, just like with book banning. But we do support states in the development of their reading program. We work with state reading teams to push programs that are evidence-based, and we provide funding for those over those that have no basis in evidence.
So just to be clear, are you saying that that under the law you're not allowed to say that a program has to be based on, say, have a phonics element to it?
We say it has to be evidence-based, and phonics-based programs are evidence-based.
Right. So would a whole language curriculum, like the old Lucy Calkins curriculum, would that qualify?
If the program is an evidence-based program that has evidence to show that it works, it would be something that we would consider supporting. And that's where I want to be careful not to single out any one particular program over another. They have to be evidence-based. What's the evidence that it works? Programs that have phonics, phonemic awareness, oral fluency, and those are evidence-based.
But are also ones that don't have that?
the evidence shows that they don't work.
But do you know of any that are evidence-based that don't have that element?
I have not reviewed the what's come in, but I mean, it's pretty clear. I think we're talking, look, we know what works in reading. I just spewed out the 5 strategies as a former classroom teacher, as a former principal. We know what works, so does my team know what works, and we know that a good foundation of reading includes phonics and phonemic awareness. Those are the programs that we fund.
Okay. Gabriel Rubin from the Wall Street Journal.
Let's go back to our conversation about the new IDR plan.
Mm-hmm.
And you sort of mentioned that the federal government's levers in being able to lower the cost of college are limited. I mean, you certainly have certain people with gainful employment being one of them.
Right.
But overall, they're pretty limited. I guess, does a program like SAVE and previous IDR programs, but certainly this one, given its generosity, does it encourage people to take out loans that the federal government also sort of acknowledges are unaffordable for lots of people and don't necessarily have outcomes that match their price? Mm-hmm. So are you encouraging people to take out loans that will then have to be borne by the taxpayer at some point?
No, I want to frame my response in how we frame it. We are opening doors to higher education to people that would otherwise feel like it's not available to them. That's one strategy, and the SAVE program is an important strategy to make that possible. Undergraduates' payments would be cut in half, which would open the door to higher education for many more people and higher income. That's one strategy. We are increasing accountability. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't characterize them as, but you can't really do a lot. While I can't tell a college president, lower your costs, what I can do is lift up those colleges that are around that college that are doing a good job, or support them and create pathways into those schools through the K-12 system. We can highlight the lack of return on investment in public institutions as well. We're not limiting it to private schools, which is one of the complaints that a lot of Republicans say. No, we want to make sure there's a good return on investment. We also are working with college presidents and what we call the Big Six, the higher education member organizations, to make sure that the four-year institutions, to the question that you asked, my response, make sure that the four-year institutions are on board with the opportunities that exist. They need to evolve to make sure that they're meeting the demand of what our country needs in the coming years. With the CHIPS and Science Act, the STEM careers that are going to be available. A bipartisan infrastructure plan, there's a lot of work around rebuilding big parts of our country. And then the climate provisions under the Inflation Reduction Act, where we have tremendous potential for careers in the green energy space. When our schools evolve to meet those demands, we're going to see an improvement on the ROI. I don't see it the way you asked it, where it's asking folks to go into college and taxpayers are going to pay the expense. It's making higher education more accessible to more people. Also informing them better than we have in the past of what the fields are needed and which institutions provide you a better return on investment.
But the department continued, even while sort of lifting up those
right.
institutions that are providing a better return on investment, it's not as though FSA will stop issuing loans for students to attend institutions that have less sterling reputations. Mm-hmm. So I guess in that situation, are you encouraging someone to still, a student, an 18-year-old, right. or an older, mid-career or
sure.
to take out loans to attend that institution, even knowing that, in the long run, a majority of those loans will be paid for by taxpayers as opposed to the person who took them out?
Well, no, because, you want our student body and our parents to make informed decisions. And the work that we're doing is increasing awareness through our gainful employment regulatory process of what, students don't go into college because, they want to end up with a lot of debt. They also want to go into programs that are going to provide a good return on investment. So to me, it's open the door wider for more students to come in, be very clear about which programs you're going to come out with a lot of debt and low income, and I think in concert, we're going to have a more informed student body, families, and we're going to have students making better decisions about which programs they want to go into. No one goes into it saying, I'm going to go into this program because in 20 years, I'm going to have my debt relieved. They go into it because they want to make good money, and they want to, because as their salary increases, they're going to be paying more.
It makes it easier to make that choice, doesn't it? Because I mean, if you don't have the income,
right,
and you're enrolled in IDR, you can have a $0 monthly payment for 20 years.
Yeah, but you don't go to higher education and make $32,000 a year.
Sure, but if you were making that already and there's no cost to go to that school, and then if you come out with the same outcome, the taxpayer pays for your loans. My thinking on that case, someone goes to college to get a degree and doesn't make more than $32,000 a year, again, I think there's a false premise here that students are going to say, good, I'm going to milk the system. All I have to do is make $32,000 for 20 years, and I'm good. I'm in the clear. People don't think that way, right? People want to move ahead in life. Remember that 6th grader that I talked to you about? This young man, really bright kid, has the potential to engage in one of these million jobs that are coming, where you're starting at $75,000, $80,000. I walked out of, what was the last state we visited, Vanessa? Minnesota? Was that the one with the college, the 2-year college students that were in the HVAC program? Let's imagine there was an HVAC program in Minnesota. There were so many states. But students were walking out saying, I'm not, the 4-year program, it's so much money, and you walk out with a job. I'm going to be making, I think it was like 78, without debt, and the employer is already lined up. I got a contract, and they're going to want me to continue, and they're going to help pay. I talked to a high school student in another state that told me, and it broke my heart. This young lady said, I wanted to go to college, but I couldn't afford it. By junior year, it was out of the question. But I got involved in this apprenticeship program, and when I went to go do the apprenticeship, the employer liked me so much. They offered me a position, and they're going to pay for me to go to your college to get advanced certification so I could stay with them. They invested in her. Now she's going to college. My point is, people don't go to higher education to stay where they are. They want to, like me, I'm a first-gen college student. Higher education changed the trajectory of my life and my children's life. That's why people go into it. And we're banking on the fact that if we open doors to higher education, not only are our family's going to be better, but our country's going to be better. As I said before, when we say raise the bar, lead the world, we have the potential. Education provides us the potential to lead the world. We're making things here in America now. We're making things here in America because of the legislative policies that were passed in the last Congress. Now we have a responsibility to open doors to higher education for more students so that we can realize the promise of our country.
Can I just ask, as someone whose readership pays a lot of attention to certain elite institutions, you sound pretty down on the elite higher ed colleges we all know the names of. What do you see as their role going forward as you're supporting these ROIs, lower costs, vocational type of training?
And I have no problem with these institutions. I don't. And I've spoken with leaders, presidents of these institutions who I'm inspired after I'm done talking to them because they understand what we're trying to do. They have a role too, to ensure that these institutions are preparing their students to also lead in this space, and this opportunity that we have as a country to develop. We talk about the supply chain, and we saw what happened with that, right? So the way I look at it is, car prices went up because we were waiting on these chips that were being developed in a country that was shut down. So we decided we're going to make it here in America. The CHIPS and Science Act was passed. We are now building. They have a responsibility, too, to help develop that infrastructure in our country with the leaders and the, maybe engineers that are going to help develop these plans, the supply chains that we're going to have in our country. They have a role here, too. I'm not going after them. I'm not downing them. What I'm saying is that instead of just putting them on a pedestal, let's put on a pedestal those institutions that are working on completion, Those institutions that have TRIO program. I'm here today. I'm not speaking at a TRIO program. They come together to, what is it called, COE? They come together, and I was going to go speak to them. But I wanted to come here, and I have someone else over there. But those TRIO programs of first-gen college students, I want to acknowledge those folks, because as we're creating policies to open the doors for higher education, we're going to rely on those institutions that take a student where they are and say, I can help you find your potential.
Okay, it's 10 o'clock, but we've got a little bit of a late start. So can you take a couple more?
Look, I have a call with an appropriator.
Uh-oh.
But I think we could
just
10 more minutes, Christina?
Okay, Mary Lou Masters from Daily Caller.
Yes, I just wanted to follow up on his question a
Sure.
little bit earlier. So there's also schools right now that are canceling classes because of the COVID-19 surge. Will you tell these schools not to shut down to prevent further labor loss in the future that your department has addressed?
Yes, I have done that. I was interviewed last week somewhere, and the first thing I said is don't close schools down. But look, they're not closing schools because of proliferation of COVID. They're closing it because the classroom teacher has to stay home. And the classroom teacher has to stay home, possibly because the classroom teacher has COVID. That's what I'm talking about with the impact. And then when we have governors from hundreds of miles away sending down edicts of how to handle that, we can't be surprised when schools close because they don't have staff. Our ultimate responsibility as educators is to keep children safe. When you don't have enough staff in the building to keep children safe, children will not be as safe. So, again, I have confidence in my educators, working with our health partners. We know so much more now than we did 3 years ago. It's my expectation that our schools stay open, that we give students more, not less. So I want to be very clear about that. At this point in the game, we should know how to maintain our schools open. That doesn't mean that there's not interference from state government messing up the strategies that are helping keep schools safe.
Rob Wolf from Washington Monthly, to your right.
Hi.
Hi.
You were rather critical of U.S. News rankings earlier this year, but earlier this year.
That wasn't that bad now.
No, sure. Earlier this year you called them false alter.
That was pretty bad, yeah.
I was curious if criticism is not only for their focus on exclusivity, but also for the sort of sway that rankings have, or if you might be open to the idea of rankings on sort of more social mobility and service. And this is where this becomes a self-service.
Sure.
I'm curious if you're familiar with ours.
if I give you a Raise the Bar book, will you give me yours? No, look, just so you know, too, I had a conversation with leaders at U.S. News World Food Report rankings. I'd love them to be at the table to talk about how to lift up those institutions that are focusing on completion. You mentioned upward mobility. We're working with Ted Mitchell at ACE to try to highlight what they're doing to acknowledge upward mobility of students that go to specific colleges. So we're very much in line with that. I don't know that the influence of U.S. News on parent decisions is as great as people think it is. I think I read something this morning about that. But, I'm all in favor of rewriting the narrative to bring attention to those institutions that are helping a lot of our students who thought college wasn't accessible to them be successful and find their path. I'm all in favor of that, and I'd love to look at whatever you have. I just want to read. Yesterday, I got this. I got this yesterday from someone who sent this to me, and I brought several of them. But I'll just read you a line from hers. Rachel wrote, "Thank you for helping make my life better. Each month, I'll be able to put that $1,100 student loan payment toward a retirement savings, or donate to my favorite charity, or support a local business, or make a home repair. Frankly, I have no idea yet how this will positively impact my life. Right now, all I know is that I could breathe deeply. That is, once I'm done crying tears of joy." This is someone that earned public service loan forgiveness. And it was finally fixed to get the loan forgiveness to this person. And I share this with you, even though it didn't come after a question that was asking about it, because I think sometimes we talk about, in D.C. in particular, again, I spent a week in D.C. before, we talk in D.C. about big numbers. We're very quantitative here. When we look deeper and look at the qualitative impact on the lives of Americans across the country, we get to understand why this is so important. So for me, the bus tour, these letters, we have an opportunity to peer into the lives of Americans that are benefiting from our policies around SAVE, around public service loan forgiveness, and around college completion from a school that looked at the student and said, you know what, we're going to build supports around you. Georgia State University is an example that I brought up twice today. And I do that for a reason. Because, 10, 20 years ago, they recognized investing in mental health of students matters. Investing in counseling to these students who don't know how to pick a class. I graduated from a technical high school. I fixed cars for 4 years. And I was the first in my family to go to college, man. When I got dropped off there, I knew I couldn't fail because my parents sacrificed too damn much for me to have a chance to go to college. I didn't know how to pick a class. I was struggling. It took maybe a year before I got to the point where I'm like, I'm going to walk into the dean's office and I'm going to say, if somebody doesn't help me, I'm leaving. And they recognized, because I was doing really well. And they realized they got to increase the counseling there. We have institutions that are being designed to help students where they are, whether it's poverty, lack of counseling. I visited schools in the last 2 years that help homeless students get their degrees. They're quiet about it, but they're helping homeless kids, students who live in a car, get their degree. I want to lift that up. We have that happening across the country.
Okay, final question, Ian Cousins from the PBS NewsHour.
Yeah, thanks so much for doing this, sir. I just wanted to quickly ask, Biden promised to appoint a book ban coordinator about 3 months ago, and I'm curious, where that stands and what the holdup is.
Excuse me?
What the holdup is.
Yeah. So look, I think the key thing here is we have a lot of folks that are running on division in education. The book banning topic is one of those. But it's significant enough for us to pay attention to it because we have students across the country who come from diverse backgrounds that don't see themselves in books or are feeling attacked. Black curriculum in Florida is under attack, as are LGBTQI students. So for us, it's that important that it has to become part of the responsibility of someone in office for civil rights. So we do have someone in a high position under the Office for Civil Rights who will take on the responsibilities of monitoring, providing technical assistance, making sure that they're working with boards and districts around these topics that have been concerned. Information will be coming out very soon. I don't want to jump the gun on that, but it is important to us. We wanted to make sure that it's something that's embedded in the work that we do at the department, and the Office for Civil Rights is the best place for it.
So has that person been, talked to you about this job yet? Does that person know this is coming?
It's a surprise to them. No. They yes, we're having those conversations. More to come soon.
All right, great. Well, thank you for staying a little extra, and it was great to have you again.
Thank you all for covering in hot commodity. Check it out. Thank you all. Have a good day.
So those are additional thank you notes from people.
Yeah, these are. I literally saw these yesterday. People are saying that their loans their debt is done, and just the change in their lives and their families' lives.
Sure.
Yeah. Testimonies like sometimes I walk around with it to remind me when we talk about this big policy.
Right, and then
this is what
an actual human being is.
And you have to put faces to this stuff. We're talking about people's lives and their families' lives.
Sure.
Good to see you.
All right. Yeah. Good to see you.